Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for part 2 of a 6-part series as we lather up in the baths with Henrik Ibsen, talking about an enemy of the people. And every time I say an enemy of the people, I have to stop myself, because I'm pretty sure there's been at least 4 times already in this series, and we're on episode 2, that I have said an enemy of the state. My hair's all over the place. I apologize for that. So, what happened in this act, Act 2, Mrs. Stockman brings the doctor a letter from Brother Mayor Pete saying he'll be over in a little bit to talk about the baths. Mrs. Stockman's father then stops by because it turns out Petra told him about the H2O. And he thinks it is all just a gag, a funny, a laugh, a ha-ha. But it is not the H2O ha-ha. It's really a problem. And when Hofstede shows up, Mrs. Stockman's father implies that Hofstede too is in on the joke. And then he leaves. And Hofstede is there to bring terrible news that the officials are going to stand in the way of correcting the H2O. They don't like that people already know about it. They think it would be expensive, and they don't really plan on correcting the issue. Hofstede then struggles with the social implications of the story until Alaskan, the printer, shows up. Alaskan offers the support of the tradespeople, a small majority of the town, and the power dynamic in the scene herein sort of shifts because the doc is not sure. So Hofstede showed up and he was struggling with the social implications, but he was very firm in his assertion that this stand needed to be taken, which the doctor kind of said, well, yeah, of course it does. And then when Alaskan shows up and he says, we're going to stand behind you, we, the tradespeople, are going to be with you on this, the doctor doesn't understand what is going on. Why should it take so much support in order just to do the right thing? He doesn't understand. Because of the status quo, offers Alaskan, which is funny because when he leaves, Hofstede implies that it is a good thing that this H2O popped up because it gave Alaskan a spine, implying that he was complacent before all of this started going down, that he had shaken off cowardice in the face of this thing. Even though he's a real decent guy. He's a real decent guy. Everyone seems to think he's a nice guy. And we get this quote. This is from Hofstede. There is one thing I esteem higher than that, being well-intentioned, that is. And that is a man to be self-reliant and sure of himself. Self-reliant and sure of himself. This has brought to Alaskan the respect of Hofstede, it seems. Hofstede then takes a shot at Mayor Pete. He's not happy just taking a shot at old Alaskan. He takes a shot at Mayor Pete. And the doc gives him an article, gives Hofstede an article he wrote as Hofstede leaves. Shortly thereafter, Mayor Pete does show up, and he takes the very suspicion shown by the doc, as well as the the very suspicion as well as the investigation as a stab in the back, does Mayor Pete. And Pete says, I've got some bad news, Doc, but it would cost $15,000 to $20,000 in order to correct this problem, as well as 2 years. Not to mention the public opinion. So I don't think this is going to get done. And on 26, we get this quote. from Mayor Pete. And all this at this juncture, just as the baths are beginning to be known. There are other towns in the neighborhood with qualifications to attract visitors for bathing purposes. Don't you suppose they would immediately strain every nerve to divert the entire stream of strangers to themselves? Unquestionably they would. And then where would we be? We should probably have to abandon the whole thing, which would cost us so much money. And then you would have ruined your native town. And the doc is furious. I would have ruined the town. Mightn't it ruin the town to realize that people are poisoning themselves by bathing in the baths to begin with? Pete tells the doc not to go to the committee, with this problem, that in time we will handle it privately. And the doc says, too late, cat's out of the bag. Pete says, hey, this is going to suck, and you're going to tell everyone you're sorry and that you were mistaken. It gets worse. On page 29, we get these few quotes. Peter Stockman says, Mayor Pete says, as an officer under the committee, you have no right to an individual opinion. The doc says, amazed, no right. And Pete says, in your official capacity, no. As a private person, it is quite another matter, but as a subordinate member of the staff of the baths, you have no right to express any opinion which runs contrary to that of your superiors. And we can tell that's not going to sit well with the doc. The doc says, this is too much. I, a doctor, a man of science, have no right to, and Peter interrupts him. The matter in hand is not simply a scientific one. It is a complicated matter, and has economic as well as its technical side. Shortly after this, Petra and Mrs. Stockman bust in and break it up. And then Pete leaves, and Mrs. Stockman says, what a prick. She goes in on the doc after that and says, think of the boys. And when the doctor says, well, I am thinking of the boys. I want to be able to look them in the face. She says, well, if you're not going to think of the boys, think of me. So we've got a lot of things going on in this act. And one thing that I did not expect was the sitcom twist, with Morton thinking that it is something joking. That the Mrs. Stockman's father thinking that this is all just an elaborate plot, an elaborate joke. And this is interesting. Because there's no way that this is just a throwaway line, So this is such a small part of the scene that it would be easy to assume this isn't going to come back. There's no way with Henrik Ibsen writing this thing, that this is not going to come back. This is an idea that's going to come back and pay dividends. And it's also, this was a very powerful act as far as introducing new ideas and new dynamics. And ideas and dynamics that have modern-day implications. And ideas and dynamics that have overarching implications to life. This quote coming to us from page 19, where it is Hofstede and the doctor. The doc says, yes, but after all, they are men of ability and knowledge. And Hofstede says, did they show any ability or knowledge when they laid the conduit pipes where they are now? And obviously they did not. So what's going on here is there were people who were lesser qualified to do this thing than got the job. Lesser people qualified. I don't know what I just said. The people who got the job were not qualified to do it. How often is that the case in today's world? It turns out it's not just today's world that happens. Another idea that comes up with this is the idea of doing what is the good thing, the right thing. This is the difference between the ideas of nice and kind. Surround yourself with as many kind people as possible and as few nice people as possible. Why? Nice people will let you bathe in doo-doo water, it seems. Nice people, so the difference between nice and kind, if I have something in my teeth and we're talking and you see it and you say, hey, Adrian, Got something on your teeth there, buddy. That makes you a kind person because you want what is best for me. A nice person wants what is nice, wants what is easy, wants everyone to sort of feel good about themselves, whether it is the right thing or not. Nice people will not tell you about the crud in your teeth because it would make you feel bad to clean it away. Because you might go through your entire day with that thing on your teeth, but never know it. And if that happens, hey, you don't feel bad about it, which is an awful way to be. And that is what the doc is saying. It would be an awful thing to do to let these people bathe in the baths and just sort of bathe in all this crud. But another thing that pops up, and this is surrounding the dynamic with Mrs. Stockman's father and Hofstede. So Hofstede gives to us on page 19, when I took over the People's Messenger, my idea was to break up this ring of self-opinionated old fossils who had got hold of all the influence. All the influence, like appointing the people who were to build the baths and ended up building the pipes at the wrong depth so that the water which entered the baths was corrupted, was diseased. This is coming to us the page after we get this quote from Morton Kill, Mrs. Stockman's father, the older generation. He says, the whole town, well, it wouldn't be a bad thing. It would just serve them right and teach them a lesson. They think themselves so much cleverer than we old fellows. They hounded me out of the council. They did, I tell you. They hounded me out. Now they shall pay for it. You pull their legs too, Thomas. This is when Mrs. Stockman's father still believes that this is all a joke. So he thinks that the doc is getting one over on the town and that it serves the town right because they had pushed him out of the council, which is a strange take to have. But it is a take that would be obvious if you were older and pushed out of the council. You would think that it's because these young bucks, these young whippersnappers, think they are so much better, so much cleverer, so much smarter, so much more advanced. So we have that dynamic popping up as well. The next thing I think I want to talk about is the quote that came to us from page 29. Mayor Pete says, as an officer of the committee, you have no right to an individual opinion. Dr. Stockman says, amazed, no right. And Peter Stockman says, in your official capacity, no. As a private person, it is quite another matter. But as a subordinate member of the staff of baths, you have no right to express an opinion that runs contrary to that of your superiors. And you got to remember that power dynamic there. Mayor Pete telling him, your superiors forbid you to speak on this. Because we're going to come back to those ideas a little bit later. But the idea of not being able to have an opinion, not really, not an opinion that you share. Boy, that's something that comes up today too. Freedom of speech versus cancel culture. What is it? Under what circumstance are you allowed to communicate your ideas, and what might be the things that you have to deal with in the wake of expressing your opinion? What does freedom of speech actually mean? It means that you can say anything, but not really, does it? Does it mean that you can say anything but not have to worry about consequence? No, it means that you might suffer the consequence of saying anything you want. But then, what does it mean to be able to say anything you want? What does freedom of speech actually mean? And this is obviously something that we are dealing with time and time again today. Not only just on social media. Just on social media does this come up. And then all of a sudden, the outrage mob comes and we've got to cancel someone and we've got to get someone fired and all this bullshit. Even if someone is misspeaking at the time, even if it's such a disgusting thing that so many people have so many fifis today. And I try not to share too many of my own feelings on things, but this is something that's absolutely disgusting to me. But it is something that obviously happened back in these days as well. And that's one of the things that makes a writer like Henrik Ibsen so timeless. Being able to analyze and diagnose issues which matter in your day, put them in context of your day, but put them in a context that is loose enough that they will be able to be communicated at any time. So moving along, on page 26, Mayor Pete says, "And all this at this juncture, just as the baths are beginning to be known. There are other towns and other neighborhoods with qualifications to attract visitors for bathing purposes. Don't you suppose they would immediately strain every nerve to divert the entire stream of strangers to themselves? Unquestionably they would. And then, where should we be? We would probably have to abandon the whole thing, which has cost us so much money. And then you have ruined your native town." This becomes the question today of COVID-19, of the coronavirus. What risk is worth it? Do we shut down the economy here, the entire economy, essentially the foreign economy anyway, the foreign money coming into the town, the lifeblood of the town, how that town might grow its economy? That's the baths. And if the disease is too bad, people won't come back. We'll have to shut down the economy. We'll have to lock everything down. And how long will we have to lock everything down? And what will be the consequences after locking this thing down? This is another question that is raised in this, and I'm excited. So a few threads have come up that I'm excited to see where they go. The thread of the sitcom angle with Mrs. Stockman's father believing this is all a joke. I'm wondering where that thread goes. I am wondering the conclusion and the answer to what level of health problem is worth it according to the financial dynamics placed upon the society. This is something that I think a lot of people are struggling with at the moment, having to raise the question of how much risk is inherent to society, how much risk do we pay the taxes for, how much risk is assumed on daily Congress. Those things all being so prevalent at the moment, I am interested to see how Ibsen deals with them. So moving on from that, on page 24, do you remember that scene in Scream where one of the characters says, "I'll be back," and they all point at him and say, "No, you don't say that, because in horror movies you don't say that, because that's the scene where you die." This comes to us on page 24 from the doctor. "By Jove, it's a fine thing to feel this bond of brotherhood between oneself and one's fellow citizens." This is the literary equivalent of "I'll be back," or what was it? I think it's "I'll be back." "I'll be right back," something like that. But this is the literary equivalent of that. This is, the doc puts this out there so boldly and so confidently. It's nice to feel this welcome. It's not going to last very long. And it is strange to see that sentiment coming from the doctor, that it's nice to be so welcomed. Because we talked last time about the alpha-sigma dynamic there, the alpha personality and the sigma personality. What are the differences there and what's going on? And we open up this act with a quote from Dr. Stockman about Mayor Pete. He really will be pleased enough, you know. But at the same time, Pete is so confoundedly afraid of anyone doing any service to the town except himself." The alpha wants all the credit. And we get that from the outset here in Act 2. Mayor Pete is the alpha. He wants the credit. He wants to be the good guy. He wants to lead from the front. All these things going on. And we are contrasted with him here on page 27. The contrast to Mayor Pete's alpha, that was the doc on Mayor Pete. Here's Mayor Pete on the doc. Doctor says, and do you consider that I do that? Which is all this compromising of himself. And Peter says, yes, unfortunately, you do without even being aware of it. You have a restless, pugnacious, rebellious disposition. What does that sound like? And then there is that disastrous propensity of yours to want to write about every sort of possible and impossible thing. The compulsion to write, God forbid, right? The moment an idea comes into your head, you must needs go and write a newspaper article or a whole pamphlet about it. This is the struggle of the individual. This is the struggle of the sigma. The sigma being the very definition of individual, versus the alpha being the very definition of in the group, wanting to lead the group, versus the sigma who says, take the group. That is an interesting dynamic, and it is previously further explicated on page 23, where Hofstede, we've gone through this quote a couple times here in this episode. Hofstede saying, there's one thing I esteem higher than that, it is for a man to be self-reliant and sure of himself. Why are we getting that? Why do we get that from Hofstede? Why do we get that as praiseworthy? I think it's because if we go back to page 27 and we reread this description, restless, pugnacious, rebellious disposition, disastrous propensity to write about every sort of possible and impossible thing. The moment an idea comes into your head, you must needs go and write. This sounds a lot like the Sigma personality. What else does it sound like? Is it possible that this is a self-portrait from Henrik Ibsen? These are all qualities that writers have. And here in Ghosts, A Doll's House, Peer Gynt, and now An Enemy of the People, Henrik Ibsen is writing about things which would make him unpopular. Is this a self-portrait of the artist? It is interesting to think so, because before this, he sets up a little compliment for himself in the fact that all of those things are, what were they? On 23 here, self-reliant and sure of himself. Those are good qualities to have. They're very Sigma qualities to have. And then on 28, we get this coming from Peter Stockman. You want to pick a quarrel with your superiors, an old habit of yours. You cannot put up with any authority over you. You look askance at anyone who occupies a superior official position. You regard him as a personal enemy. And then any stick is good enough to beat him with. This again is definitive of the Sigma type personality. Sigma type personalities are incapable of accepting authority. They rebel at any moment they can. They rebel at the first moment that they can. So all of the things that we have going on here, it is the Sigma personality that is more than willing to become an enemy of the people. It is the Alpha personality that is more than willing to turn the people against someone. So that is a troubling dynamic. That is an obvious dynamic in this piece. And now we've got other dynamics popping up. We have the public good versus public opinion. We have nice versus kind. We have old versus young. We have authority versus knowledge, perhaps. The authority is not always able to pick the knowledgeable one. They pick what they are comfortable with, does the authority, and run with it. That's how the pipes for the baths got laid in the wrong place to begin with. So we have all of these dynamics, freedom of speech versus consequences for speech. We have all of these dynamics at play, and we're not even halfway through the play yet. We're coming up on Act 3, but that is all those are all of the talking points that I have for Act 3 of the play. I hope to see you back, or for Act 2 of the play. I hope to see you back next week for Act 3.